So what we're going to do now is take a look at the skull, all right? And the first thing that we're going to look at in the skull are these things called sutures. Now sutures look like cracks in the skull. So this is a suture, these are sutures, this is a suture. But what they actually are is a joint between two bones. So let's learn the names of 4 of these here. So this suture right here is called the coronal suture. So just like a coronal section, it's going the same direction. All right. So this is called the coronal suture. The next suture is right here. That suture is known as a sagittal section, or is a sagittal suture. So just like a sagittal section would divide the skull like this, the sagittal suture divides along the same line. The next suture is found over here. This suture over here is called the squamous or squamosal suture. So that's a squamous suture. The one that's in the back of the skull, right here, is the lambdoid, also known as the lambdoidal suture. So that is the lambdoid suture, right there. So let's look at the names of most of the bones on our skull. The bone that's right here, our forehead bone, that is known as the frontal bone. So that is the frontal bone, comes down over the eyes, and all the way back to the coronal suture. Behind the coronal suture, these bones here, which are divided by the sagittal suture, these 2 bones here are the parietal bones. So this is a parietal bone, and that's a parietal bone. We look on the side here, here's a parietal bone, there's the frontal bone. The next bone along here is this bone right here. This is the temporal bone. So the temporal bone is separated from the parietal bone by the squamous suture. So that right there is the temporal bone. And it actually comes down here as well. So if we look at a couple of structures that we find on the temporal bone, this hole right here is known as our external auditory meatus. So that's essentially where our ear goes in. So that's our external auditory meatus. We also see this structure right here. You see the bone comes down a little bit right there. Nice, rounded. That is called the mastoid process. So that structure right there is the mastoid process. We look towards the back of the skull here. This area right here, separated from these parietal bones by the lambdoid suture, this here is the occipital bone. Now the occipital bone also extends to the underside of our skull to here. And so we see a couple of structures here we want you to know. This large hole right here is called the foramen magnum. Foramen means hole, magnum means large, large hole. So that is the foramen magnum. Now on either side of the foramen magnum, you can see these structures that go down. So you see this right here and that right here. This is what they look like on the top view again. Those are the occipital condyles. So those are the occipital condyles. So once again, here's what they look like here. Occipital condyles. We look back towards the front of the skull in the side view. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So if we look here, you can actually see there's a suture right there. You can see a suture right there, and then one here. So those are going around this bone right here, and this is called the zygomatic bone. So this bone right here is the zygomatic bone. So it is essentially our cheekbone. So right there, zygomatic bone. I'm going to wide out again. So there it is again, zygomatic bone. And we also have it on the other side there. Here's zygomatic. Next are the maxilla bones. There's actually 2 of these, so they are split here, and one covers up to here and over here, over here and over here. So the maxilla bones here essentially are upper lip bones. And they go around our nasal cavity there. So those are the maxilla bones. Next is our mandible. Our mandible is our jaw. So that is our mandible. Right there is our mandible. Next are the nasal bones. Now the nasal bones are essentially the bridge of our nose. So these two little bones right here are the nasal bones. There's two little guys. So if you look on the side view, you can see that suture there. So there's that nasal bone right there. And there is another one on the other side. The last bone here is this one right here. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit to get perspective. Here we have frontal bone. Here we have parietal bone. Here's temporal bone. So this bone, as you can see these sutures around there, that is the sphenoid bone. So that is sphenoid bone. And it's the same bone that continues all the way to the other side. So this bone right here is sphenoid bone. We can also see it on the underneath here. So the bone that's in this region is also sphenoid bone. There is a structure within the skull that some of you have to learn, and this bone, or this structure, also in the sphenoid bone right here, is called the sella tursum.